So I want you to just take a second and picture this. You're sitting in your absolute favorite, most comfortable chair in the house.
Oh, yeah. The one that's perfectly broken in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got a hot cup of coffee. The house is perfectly quiet. It's just this idyllic, peaceful morning. And then, bam, a wizard knocks on your door and completely upends your entire life.
Just shatters the peace for the sake of, a grand, incredibly dangerous calling.
Right. And that is exactly, I mean, literally, where J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit begins. And it's what we're getting into today.
It's such a brilliant opening.
It really is.
Yeah.
So welcome to today's Deep Dives. We're entirely tearing down that idyllic image of the Shire today. We've got a stack of really fascinating literary analyses, and we're pairing them directly with excerpts from Tolkien's book.
But we're taking a very specific angle with this, right?
Yeah, we are. We're looking at this beloved fantasy classic through a distinctly biblical, conservative, evangelical lens.
Which is, it's an angle that I think catches a lot of modern readers totally off guard.
Oh, for sure. Why do you think that is?
Well, we tend to really compartmentalize our reading these days. We put our heavy theology books on one shelf, and then we put our fun fantasy novels on a completely different shelf.
Like they aren't allowed to mix.
Right, exactly. But blurring that line is profoundly intentional when you actually look at the source material we're working with today.
And that is the part that just has me so deeply curious. I mean, the fact that we are taking a story built on, dragons and dwarves and an incredibly reluctant hobbit, and we're going to explore how it actually functions as a remarkably accurate mirror for the Christian walk.
It really does function that way beautifully.
Yeah, so our mission today, we're going to do this without getting bogged down in, heavy academic or theological jargon, is to uncover how Tolkien's narrative warns us of the spiritual dangers of things like pride and materialism.
And conversely, how it inspires us to live out real humility.
Yes. Humility, trusting in God's providence, and ultimately finding a fuller love for Christ in our daily lives. But I have to say, the concept that a fictional world like Middle-earth can provide practical grounding wisdom for our real-world faith, that's a massive claim.
It is a massive claim. But to understand why it actually holds up under scrutiny, we kind of need to establish a bit of groundwork about the author himself.
Right, because he wasn't just writing this in a vacuum.
Not at all. Tolkien wasn't just penning a charming little children's adventure story on a whim. He was a devout, deeply committed Christian.
And a pretty intense scholar, too.
Oh, incredibly so. Professionally, he was a brilliant scholar of ancient literature at Oxford. He spent his entire life immersed in ancient texts, like Beowulf and the Poetic Edda.
So he knew how myth and story function.
Exactly. But his core worldview was fundamentally shaped by scripture. Now, he famously disliked allegory. He didn't want to write a one-to-one parallel like C.S. Lewis kind of did with Narnia.
Right. Aslan isn't literally Jesus in Middle-earth.
Right. But Tolkien deliberately wove biblical wisdom, Old Testament themes, and a really robust Christian moral framework into the very foundation of Middle-earth.
It's like it operates under a universe where God's truth is just the underlying ultimate reality.
That's a great way to put it. The physics of his moral universe are biblical.
So we aren't just, mapping our own modern ideas onto some random book. We're actually uncovering the architecture that Tolkien deliberately built.
Precisely. We're just looking at the blueprints he used.
I love that. And that architecture, it starts in the most unassuming place possible. So let's dig into the very beginning of the journey where we meet our protagonist, Bilbo Baggins.
Right, back in the absolute safety of his hobbit hole bag end.
Yeah. And if we're going to understand this as a spiritual journey, we really have to evaluate what this hero is being asked to leave behind.
Well, and if you look at how Bag End is described in our sources, it isn't just a physical house. It really functions as a complete worldview.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by a worldview?
It's an insulated kingdom of one. It's this perfectly curated environment where Bilbo is the absolute master of his domain.
The sources highlight this so well. The opening chapters meticulously detail his obsession with physical comfort.
Oh, yeah, the pantries.
The pantries. It's all about polished surfaces,
Yeah.
fully stocked pantries like multiple pantries, and perfectly predictable routines. The guy has a deep, deep affection for his pocket handkerchiefs.
He does. His entire existence is structured around avoiding anything that he would classify as unexpected.
Right. He literally says, "We are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things."
And that introduces this fascinating internal dichotomy that Tolkien sets up right away. The Baggins versus the Took.
Yeah, tell us about that, because that internal conflict seems like the engine of the whole early narrative.
It really is. So the Baggins side of his lineage, that's the side that desires this respectable, uninterrupted, almost Victorian domestic stability.
The side that wants second breakfast exactly on time.
Exactly. If you meet a Baggins, you can always predict what they're going to say or do without even the bother of asking them. But then he has this Took ancestry on his mother's side.
And the Tooks are a bit of a wild card, really.
They are. The Tooks possess this latent, kind of dangerous capacity for wonder. They are known to occasionally just go off on adventures, which the rest of the Hobbit community considers highly unrespectable.
Highly unrespectable. That's such a great phrase. It's this profound tension between maintaining the comfortable status quo and actually stepping into the unknown.
And it's into this perfectly ordered, frankly trivial morning routine that Gandalf the Wizard just walks in, followed by a company of 13 dwarves.
And it isn't just an interruption. It's an absolute invasion.
Yeah, think about how the text handles their arrival. The dwarves don't just come in and, ask politely for a cup of tea and a chat about the weather.
No, they start demanding cakes and ale and completely take over his house.
Right, but more than that, they bring these solemn, ancient, really heavy songs into Bilbo's cozy little parlor. It is a massive linguistic and cultural collision.
Oh, I see what you mean. The tone completely shifts.
It does. You have Bilbo frantically running around apologizing, trying to offer seed cake and beer just to maintain his polite host status, while the dwarves are sitting by his fire chanting about deep dungeons, lost gold, and ancient kings.
It's like this archaic, heroic, slightly terrifying world is just bursting through his front door.
Exactly. It's pulling Bilbo out of his incredibly narrow, self-focused existence into a much grander historical struggle.
When I was reading through this analysis, I found myself kind of uncomfortably thinking about my own weekend routine.
Oh, I think we all do.
Right. Because it is so easy to read Bilbo as just a quaint, funny little character. But from an evangelical perspective, this setup perfectly mirrors the tension in our own Christian lives.
It really does. That pull between comfort and calling.
Exactly. We constantly navigate the pull between seeking worldly comfort and answering God's calling. Bag End is essentially our human desire to build a safe, predictable kingdom on earth where we are in charge.
It's the illusion of total control, really. We want the pantries full, we want the doors double-locked against the wild, and we want our retirement accounts completely secured.
We want the perfect 401k and the manicured lawn.
Right, because we want to insulate ourselves, because the world outside is broken and it's dangerous.
And here is the kicker. We often mistake that insulation for righteousness.
Oh, man. That is so true.
We think, well, I have a nice lawn, a quiet life, a hassle-free weekend, I don't bother anyone, I pay my taxes. Therefore, I am living a godly life.
When in reality, we are just cultivating our own personal shire.
Exactly. We are avoiding the brokenness of the world that Christ actually calls us to step into and engage with. God so often disrupts our second breakfast to pull us into his broader redemptive story.
And that disruption is crucial. When Bilbo eventually runs out of his door without his hat, without his pocket handkerchief, leaving his breakfast half-finished.
Which is a huge deal for a hobbit.
A massive deal. But it serves as this striking, almost literal picture of leaving our earthly securities behind to step out in faith.
That threshold moment just feels so vital.
It is. In the ancient texts Tolkien studied, you frequently see this pattern of the exile leaving home. But biblically, it resonates with these profound moments of disruption throughout Scripture.
Like who? Give me an example.
Well, it echoes Abraham, right?
Yeah.
Being told by God to leave Ur and go to a land he did not know, just pack up and leave everything familiar.
Oh, yeah. Or the disciples in the New Testament.
Exactly. It mirrors the disciples dropping their familiar fishing nets on the shore to follow Christ into a completely uncertain future. They literally leave the known economy for an unknown kingdom.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. Leaving the known economy for an unknown kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But, I do wonder about the actual process of that shift.
What do you mean?
Because stepping out the door in a moment of adrenaline is one thing, but actually changing your heart's reliance from comfort to God's calling, that is entirely different. How does the narrative actually force Bilbo to stop relying on his physical comforts?
Because it certainly doesn't happen overnight just because he left his house.
Right. The first time it rains, he's miserable.
Which brings up a really brilliant structural observation from our sources. Tolkien uses mundane physical items like hearth fires, regular meals, and pocket handkerchiefs to actually measure Bilbo's internal spiritual growth.
So the handkerchief isn't just a gag. It's a metric for his spiritual maturity.
Exactly. It's the process of sanctification mapped onto a fantasy adventure. Early on in the narrative, Bilbo is riding a pony in the rain, and the mere absence of a pocket handkerchief makes him feel profoundly vulnerable and just absolutely miserable.
He literally says, bother burgling and everything to do with it. He wants to quit immediately.
He is completely unraveled by the loss of a minor convenience, but I
Yeah.
want you to track that trajectory over the course of the book.
Okay, let's fast forward.
By chapter 12, Bilbo is standing in the dark, deep under the lonely mountain. He voluntarily walks down a pitch-black tunnel toward a fire-breathing dragon.
All by himself.
All by himself. At that point, he doesn't have a handkerchief. He doesn't have his comfortable chair. He doesn't even have Gandalf holding his hand anymore. He is utterly stripped of all his worldly crutches.
That is such a vivid picture of how sanctification actually works in the Christian
It
life.
really is.
Because it isn't just about trying harder to be brave. It's the slow, often really painful mechanism of having our earthly comforts removed so that our spiritual muscles are forced to actually engage.
The brain and the soul essentially have to rewire themselves. They have to learn to rely on the eternal rather than the temporal.
Yeah. His reliance fundamentally shifts from external comfort to an internal courage that's rooted in doing what is necessary and right.
And that internal shift, that's the necessary preparation for what comes next. Because once you leave the comfort of your own kingdom and once you are sanctified through that wilderness,
You inevitably run into the principalities and powers of the fallen world.
exactly, you have to face the dragon.
Which brings us to Smaug. And the transition here is just fascinating because Bilbo has conquered his inner desire for comfort, but now he has to face the external reality of evil.
And the dragon is the ultimate external evil in this world.
Right. And the analysis in our sources points out something here that completely changed how I read this encounter. Smaug isn't just a generic fantasy monster.
Not at all.
He is directly, structurally modeled after a specific biblical creature, Leviathan, from the book of Job, specifically chapter 41.
This is where Tolkien's deep scriptural literacy just really shines. He is utilizing the biblical vocabulary of evil to construct his primary antagonist.
Let's look at the text to see how closely they parallel, because it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, lay it out.
So in The Hobbit, Smaug is boasting to Bilbo in the dark about his impenetrable armor. He says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but he says, "My armor is like tenfold shields. My teeth are swords, my claws spears, the shock of my tail, a thunderbolt."
Just this terrifying display of self-sufficiency.
Man, now compare that to God's description of Leviathan in Job 41. The biblical text describes Leviathan's back as rows of shields tightly sealed together.
Tenfold shields versus tightly sealed shields.
Exactly. It talks about his terrifying teeth, his sneezes that flash forth light, and the actual fire streaming from his mouth.
The parallels are undeniable. And if we dig into the historical and theological context of Job 41, Leviathan is not just a poetic description of like a large crocodile or a dinosaur.
Right, which is how some naturalistic interpretations try to explain it away.
Exactly. In the ancient biblical imagination, Leviathan represents the ultimate terrifying embodiment of cosmic chaos and earthly pride. It is a force that is entirely untamable by human hands.
God literally asks Job, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Can you make a pet of him like a bird for your young women?"
And the rhetorical answer is obviously, no, you cannot. Leviathan cannot be reasoned with, he can't be put on a leash, and he cannot be bound by a covenant.
So when we view Smaug through this evangelical lens, he becomes the absolute archetype of earthly arrogance.
He really does.
I mean, he has hoarded this unimaginable mountain of wealth, but the dark irony is that he can't actually use a single coin of it.
No, he just sleeps on it.
Right. He doesn't build anything. He doesn't create art or establish a flourishing kingdom or help anyone. He just sleeps on stolen gold and burns anyone who gets near it.
He is entirely self-sufficient, and he views himself as completely untouchable.
Which is the essence of pride, isn't it?
Absolutely. Smaug represents the ultimate sin of pride, which in Christian theology is really the root of all sin. It is the act of exalting the created self above the moral law and above the creator.
Wow.
Yeah, and it is fascinating. In the original Hebrew of Job 41, the word used to describe Leviathan's tightly sealed scales is gava.
Okay, what does that mean?
That word literally translates to pride or arrogance. So when Smaug is boasting about his armor, he is quite literally armored in his own pride.
His pride is his literal shield.
Exactly. It forms this impenetrable shell that completely isolates him from the rest of the world.
But this presents a major theological problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, so.
Well, I think about almost all modern fantasy or, superhero stories today. The way humanity defeats the great evil is always by achieving a higher level of strength.
Right, they have a training montage.
Exactly. They train harder, they assemble a more massive CGI army, or they forge a magical glowing super sword that can cut through anything.
We always want to punch the monster harder than it punches us.
Right. But in this narrative, Smaug's armor is practically perfect. Swords bounce off his scales like pebbles. So if we were reading this biblically, how does this model the defeat of evil if human strength and human ingenuity are utterly useless?
Well, that is the exact tension Tolkien wants you to feel, because it perfectly reflects the tension in the biblical narrative.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in Job 41, the entire point of God's discourse is that no unaided human warrior can defeat Leviathan. Any human who lays a hand on him will remember the battle and never do it again.
Because human strength is just laughable against primordial pride.
Exactly. But in The Hobbit, what we see is this brilliant demonstration of divine providence working through weakness.
Oh, because Smaug's pride is actually his own undoing?
Precisely. Despite all his boasting about his tenfold shields, when he rolls over in the dark to show off his diamond-encrusted belly to Bilbo, Bilbo spots a single bare patch in the hollow of his left breast.
It's a vulnerability born entirely of his own overconfidence. If he wasn't bragging, Bilbo never would have seen it.
Right. And notice how God's justice pierces that armor of pride. It isn't accomplished by an army of dwarves or elves marching on the mountain with siege engines.
No, it happens through incredibly small, unassuming instruments.
Walk us through how it happens in the text.
So a small thrush,
Yeah.
just a little bird, happens to overhear Bilbo talking to the dwarves about that specific bear patch on the dragon.
Just a bird listening in?
Yeah, and the thrush then flies all the way down to Lake Town in the middle of Smaug's fiery attack, and it delivers this message to a humble, grim bowman named Bard.
And Bard isn't some superhero.
No, he's just a man defending his burning town, and he's down to his very last black arrow. And he uses that inherited knowledge, delivered by a bird, to strike the dragon in its one weak spot.
A bird and a man with one arrow take down the ultimate embodiment of cosmic pride.
It completely subverts our modern expectation of power. It proves that all created evil, no matter how magnificent, how wealthy, or how terrifying it appears on the surface, has a fatal vulnerability when it is confronted by divine truth.
It is a direct narrative reflection of what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians.
Remind me of the verse.
It's where Paul says that God deliberately chooses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and the weak things of the world to shame the strong.
Oh, wow.
Smaug's downfall is not a testament to human martial prowess. It is an act of divine judgment executed through humble, obedient human agency.
That is so powerful. But, the transition from the monster outside to the monster inside is where the story gets uncomfortably real for the reader.
Uncomfortably real is right.
Because killing the literal dragon actually turns out to be much easier than killing the spiritual disease that the dragon guarded for centuries.
Yes, the defeat of Smaug does not lead to a happily ever after.
Not at all. It leads directly to the profound moral crisis of the dwarves. The focus immediately shifts from the external threat to internal corruption. We are forced to look at Thorin Oakenshield.
Thorin is such an incredibly compelling character. He is a noble, exiled dwarf king. I mean, for decades, he has longed to reclaim his homeland and his people's dignity.
Right, his motivations start out feeling very righteous.
They do. But the moment he actually regains his ancestral gold, this literal, unfathomable mountain of treasure, he falls victim to a condition the text specifically names dragon sickness.
Dragon sickness.
Yeah.
And it is a terrifying, rapid psychological and spiritual deterioration.
It really is like a disease.
He becomes deeply paranoid. He becomes miserly, rigid, and just completely unreasonable.
Well, look at how he treats the men of Lake Town.
Exactly. The men of Lake Town, whose homes were just destroyed by the dragon. Thorin woke up, by the way. They come asking for just a fraction of the gold to rebuild their ruined lives. And Thorin refuses them entirely.
He shuts the gate in their face.
He's actually willing to start a bloody, catastrophic war with the elves and the men over his quote-unquote rightful share of the gold.
And our sources make a very strong connection here between Thorin's behavior and the Old Testament wisdom literature regarding covetousness.
Yeah, the parallels there are unavoidable. Proverbs 11.28 plainly states, "Whoever trusts in his riches will fall."
And Ecclesiastes 5 warns of a grievous evil under the sun, riches kept by their owner to his hurt.
Thorin's dragon sickness is a manifestation of idolatry, pure and simple. It is the ultimate tragedy of materialism.
It's exactly what Jesus warned about in the Gospels, right? For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?
Thorin finally gets the one thing he has desired his entire life, but that avarice destroys his fellowship with everyone around him.
And if you read his dialogue in these chapters, it's fascinating how it completely changes in tone.
How so?
He stops speaking like a noble, inspiring king, and he starts speaking like a lawyer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his words become highly legalistic, defensive, and focused entirely on his rights.
That linguistic shift is so revealing. It reveals the blinding nature of greed. Thorin literally stops seeing the men of Laketown or the elves as neighbors or as allies, or even as sentient beings with needs.
They are just obstacles to him now.
Right. He only views them as potential threats to his horde. The gold has become his god, and everything else, including his own honor, must be sacrificed on its altar.
But let me introduce a dilemma here, because this is something a lot of people face in the real world when dealing with things like inheritances or business disputes.
Okay, lay it on me.
Thorin is not actually stealing this gold. By every metric of Dwarven law and Middle-earth history, the gold technically does belong to him and his ancestors. Smaug stole it from his grandfather.
That's true. It is legally his.
So isn't it a bit simplistic to judge Thorin for merely wanting to keep what is legally his property? Especially when an army of elves and men show up on his doorstep armed to the teeth, essentially demanding a cut.
Man, that tension is exactly why this section of the book is an absolute masterclass in biblical ethics. Because it perfectly highlights the vast chasm between legalism and grace.
Yes. Legalism versus grace.
Because yes, by strict historical right, the gold belongs to the line of Durin. But Thorin's obsessive, white-knuckled demand for his rights absolutely blinds him to the immediate, desperate suffering of the lakemen.
We have to remember the context here.
Right. These are the very people who fed the dwarves, housed them, and supplied them when they were destitute and starving just a few weeks prior.
And furthermore, their town was literally burned to ash by the dragon that Thorin and his company woke up.
Exactly. They share a real moral culpability for the destruction, even if they didn't breathe the fire themselves.
Precisely. Thorin's rigid legalism severs his wealth from biblical stewardship. He claims the title to the gold, but he completely forgets the overarching biblical mandate to love his neighbor, to care for the distressed, and to seek justice for the poor.
It's a sobering reminder.
The text vividly demonstrates that material wealth, when it is hoarded and severed from a spirit of generosity, leads inevitably to spiritual death and broken community.
Regardless of whose name is legally on the deed.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if it's legally yours if it destroys your soul.
It is a staggering conviction for anyone looking at their own bank accounts or property lines today. I mean, how often do we stand on our rights at the expense of our neighbors?
Probably more often than we want to admit.
For sure. But thankfully, Tolkien doesn't leave the reader stranded in that despair. If Thorin serves as the tragic warning of how not to handle earthly treasure, Bilbo emerges as the complete embodiment of the Christian ideal.
The contrast is so sharp.
It really is.
Yeah.
The narrative transitions from Thorin's pride and dragon sickness directly into Bilbo's humility. Bilbo just becomes the indisputable moral compass of the climax.
While all the powerful lords and kings are preparing to literally slaughter each other over shiny rocks, the little hobbit is the only one thinking clearly.
And our sources note that Bilbo at this stage embodies the Old Testament ideal of practical wisdom combined with a profound humility of mind.
So what does he do to stop the war?
Well, to stop this impending senseless war, Bilbo does something absolutely unthinkable. He sneaks out of the mountain in the middle of the night, carrying his rightful share of the treasure.
Because by agreement, Bilbo was promised a 14th share of the hoard.
Right, and he chooses the Arkenstone. Now, the Arkenstone is a priceless, glowing jewel that is the foundational heirloom of Thorin's house. Thorin desires it above all else.
It's the heart of the mountain.
Yeah, and Bilbo takes this unimaginably valuable artifact, walks right into the enemy camp, and just gives it away.
He freely hands over his only leverage. He doesn't sell it to them. He doesn't ask for a treaty in his own name.
No.
He just gives it to the Elven King and Bard so they can use it as a bargaining chip against Thorin to force a bloodless peace.
The narrative trajectory here perfectly mirrors the biblical pattern of God elevating the lowly to confound the mighty.
It immediately brings to mind David, doesn't it?
Absolutely. David, the youngest, smallest shepherd boy, taking down Goliath while the armored king cowers in his tent. Here you have Bilbo, the smallest person on the battlefield, dictating the moral outcome of the war.
He is the living embodiment of the Beatitude. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
Oh, yes.
Bilbo sacrifices his personal enrichment. I mean, he gives up his claim to a wealth that could have bought the Shire 10 times over, specifically to seek what the Hebrews called shalom.
And shalom isn't just the absence of conflict, right?
Right. Shalom is wholeness. It's true peace, and it's the active restoration of a broken community.
I try to conceptualize what Bilbo did in modern terms, and it is almost impossible to grasp. It isn't just giving up a winning lottery ticket.
No, it's bigger than that.
It would be like a startup founder giving away the patent to their entire life's work to a rival company, simply because it would save thousands of jobs and prevent a devastating lawsuit.
That's a great analogy.
It requires a level of detachment from worldly success that feels almost alien to us today. How does Bilbo actually do it? How does he hand over the Arkenstone without becoming incredibly bitter or resentful about the wealth he just lost?
Well, that detachment is the fruit of the sanctification we discussed earlier.
The handkerchief.
Exactly. Look at what Bilbo has been through. His time out in the wilderness, facing the reality of death, trolls, goblins, and spiders, has fundamentally rewired his value system.
He sees what actually matters.
He does. He doesn't try to conquer the geopolitical situation through martial arrogance or dwarven stubbornness. When he sneaks into the enemy camp and speaks to the Elven King and Bard, he is just exhausted.
He admits that the whole grand affair of dragons and kings makes him terribly tired.
He literally says he just wants to go home and be by his own fire.
The wilderness completely stripped away the illusion that wealth brings peace.
Exactly. Because his heart has not been captured by the gold, in stark contrast to Thorin, he is entirely free to use the gold as a tool to bless others and create peace.
He holds his possessions with an open hand.
Yes, and this is the exact theological model for how Christians are called to view their worldly possessions. We are stewards, tasked with managing God's resources, not owners clinging to our own little kingdoms.
Because Bilbo is completely detached from the idol of wealth, he is literally the only character in the entire valley who can act righteously in the middle of the crisis.
It completely redefines what true nobility looks like.
It really does. In Tolkien's world, which again is a reflection of God's kingdom nobility, isn't found in your physical strength, it's not in your ancient bloodline or how large your hoard of gold is.
Oh.
True nobility is found in self-sacrifice, in giving up your rights for the good of others, and in quiet, consistent faithfulness.
Which naturally leads us to step back and look at the macro level of the story. Because we have to ask, how does quiet faithfulness actually survive in a world filled with literal and metaphorical dragons?
Right. When you look back at Bilbo's entire journey from Bag End to the Lonely Mountain, you are forced to ask how this little unarmored hobbit managed to survive trolls, escape Gollum in the dark, evade giant spiders, and outwit a dragon.
Was it merely luck?
Right. Did he just happen to stumble his way through Middle-earth on a string of incredibly fortunate coincidences?
And Tolkien doesn't leave that to interpretation. He addresses it directly and very theologically at the very end of the book.
It is one of the most profound conversations in the entire novel. They're on their way home, and Gandalf explicitly tells Bilbo not to disbelieve the old prophecies just because he had a hand in bringing them about.
Do you have the quote?
I do. Gandalf looks at him and says, "You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all."
It is a stunning, grounding rebuke, but it is delivered with such profound affection and theological depth.
From a conservative evangelical perspective, Gandalf's statement is a beautiful, concise summary of the Christian doctrine of providence.
It absolutely is.
It is the belief that God actively weaves our seemingly small, ordinary, sometimes totally chaotic lives into his grand redemptive purposes. God is sovereign over the overarching story, and he uses our free, faithful actions to bring about his ordained ends.
And what is particularly striking is Bilbo's reaction to this revelation. In a modern secular framework, being told you are just a little fellow and not the master of your own fate might be perceived as a massive insult.
Oh, people would be outraged today.
Right. But Bilbo isn't insulted. The text says he responds, thank goodness. He is immensely relieved.
And that relief is something our modern culture desperately needs to understand. I mean, we live in an era that constantly preaches a gospel of self-actualization.
We hear it everywhere.
Every commercial, every social media feed tells us that we must be the main character of reality. You have to build your personal brand, you have to chart your own destiny, and manifest your own success.
And the burden of that worldview is just staggering.
It's exhausting. If you fail, it is entirely on you. But Gandalf is essentially saying, you are not the main character, Bilbo, and that is a wonderful thing.
It is a deeply countercultural truth. If we believe that we are the sole authors orchestrating our own destinies, the anxiety and the pressure are absolutely crushing.
We'd be terrified all the time.
But if we realize, as Gandalf points out, that we are merely little fellows in a wide world, guided by a sovereign, loving, and providential God, it diminishes our anxiety immensely.
We don't have to carry the weight of the universe on our shoulders. We don't have to single-handedly slay every dragon. And we certainly don't have to manipulate every outcome to ensure our own security.
No, we are simply asked to be faithful with the Arkenstone that God has placed in our hands at this given moment.
We play our specific part in a much larger story that God is writing. For the Christian believer, it is profoundly comforting to know that divine providence, not blind, chaotic luck, is at the wheel of history.
And that is the ultimate comfort. True comfort isn't found in a locked pantry in Bag End. It is found in trusting the author of the story.
Wow. I think we need to just take a moment to really unpack the vast terrain we've covered today, because the arc of this analysis is stunning.
It's been quite a journey.
We started in the cozy, suffocating insulation of Bag End, examining the tension between our desire for worldly comfort and the disruptive call of God on our lives.
And then we watched sanctification strip away those comforts.
Right, so that Bilbo could actually face the fiery, monstrous pride of Smaug, who serves as this chilling picture of Leviathan and earthly arrogance.
And then we witnessed the tragic, cautionary reality of dragon sickness and Thorin,
reminding us of the deadly idolatry of wealth and the blinding nature of legalism over grace. And finally, we saw how Bilbo's quiet humility, his willingness to sacrifice his rights for peace, and God's unseen providence ultimately triumph over the world's might.
It truly is a masterclass in moral storytelling. Tolkien has gifted us a modern myth that breathes eternal biblical truth into our imaginations. It gives us a vocabulary to understand our own spiritual battles.
He really has. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final image from the very end of the source text. It is something for you to chew on regarding the actual cost of the spiritual journey.
The cost is real.
It is. After all of the battles, the dragons, and the sacrifices, Bilbo finally returns home to the Shire. He walks back into his comfortable hobbit hole, but the text notes that he has lost his reputation.
That's such a poignant detail.
The other hobbits in the community think he's queer and strange now. He no longer completely fits into his old, respectable, insulated, worldly life. They view him with suspicion because his values have fundamentally changed.
He's not one of them anymore.
But the text says something incredibly beautiful about his condition. He remained very happy to the end of his days.
That's the payoff.
If you truly step out in faith, if you encounter the living God and allow your heart to be transformed from hoarding your life to freely giving it away, you might start to look a little strange to the rest of the world.
You probably will.
You might lose your worldly reputation for being safe and predictable. But, like Bilbo Baggins, you will have found a profound joy, a lasting peace, and a role in a grander story that no amount of a dragon's gold could ever buy.